All right, well, good morning. Thank you all for joining this morning for the 2024 USRowing Masters Conference. Super excited to have you all here today. It's my pleasure to introduce Adrien and Reidy, and we are going to be talking about practical biomechanics using the tools you have. A quick background on Adrien. Adrien is the owner of Rowing on the Square, a physical therapy and rowing coaching clinic in Rochester, New York. She is a US Rowing Level 3 coach and para-technical classifier. She was a RowCon presenter in 2023 and guest physical therapist for US Rowing Training Camp in August of 2023. She stays active in the Rochester rowing community as executive director of the Genesee Waterway Center and by competing at local regattas. When not being a physical therapist and a rower, she enjoys spending time with her husband and 4 children. Awesome. Well, Adrien, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you. And just for everyone, if you do have questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A and we will address them at the end. So without further ado, Adrien, take it away.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining me for Practical Biomechanics using the tools that you have. As we talked about in my little bio, I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I have my own physical therapy clinic where I treat rowers and anyone with stress-related activity injuries. And of course, I'm a mom of 4, a wife, and a master's rower also. Today we're going to talk about basic biomechanics, the biomechanics in rowing. We're going to talk about kinematics and joint functions. So kinematics being the motions without the forces, and then kinetics, which is the motions with the forces. So our focus will be force curves. Of course, for kinetics, you can talk about a lot of different things, but I think the most accessible thing is to talk about force curves that we can see on those C2 machines that we're using. So what makes an athletic crew? It's a combination of the biomechanics, the rigging, and the technique, and it's the marriage between the three that talk to athleticism. So the biomechanics, can the rower complete the motion as prescribed by that coach, or the motion that they want to achieve? Does the rigging allow you to get into those positions that the biomechanics that you would like to achieve? And are you using a technique that helps to decrease the drag on the recovery, increase the force on the drive? And why is biomechanics important to rowing? There's really 2 different views. We kind of touched upon that in the agenda, that there's the kinematics, which is the motion without the forces, and then you have the kinetics, which is the forces creating the motion to maintain equilibrium. If you take a look at the picture over here to the right, this is from a biomechanics course that I took at CRI. Little shout out to CRI there. This is Maggie Fellows, and she is going through the rowing stroke. Each picture is showing the kinematics, so the forces without the motion, body position, and you can take a look at how the catch is managed, how the drive is managed, how the finish is managed. And I always think of biomechanics as being kind of like the sheet music to a song. So you can play a song by ear. There's people who do a beautiful job doing that. But when you get that sheet music, you know where the rests are, you know what actual note is being played there. And that's what biomechanics can do for us. It gives us the details that we could otherwise miss with just our naked eye as we observe ourselves. So the kinematics, the motion without the forces, we're going to talk about basic joint function. So there's normal range of motion in 3 planes of movement. We have our sagittal, transverse, and sagittal, transverse, and oh my goodness, I'm losing my words here. So we have our 3 planes of motion, frontal plane, sagittal, and transverse, and those are the motions that our joints go into. So we talk about the different joints in the body having different jobs. So we have stable joints, and then we have our mobile joints. So our stable joints would be our elbow, our knee, our spine. Those are our joints that do not have multiple planes of movement, and they're really working in like a flexion extension or a straight flexion extension rotation. We have our mobile joints, and those are the ones that we think of that have multi-directional movement. So that's your ankle, your hip, and your shoulder. Now, a joint that moves outside of its normal function is where we lead into injury and destabilization of the system. So I think of someone who's talking about, oh, I have knee pain when I row. I'm looking at the joint above and below because the knee is a stability joint. It's an open door joint, like open closed door. It really doesn't want to move outside of that. And if your knee is being forced to move outside of those movements, that means that the ankle or the hip isn't doing what it's supposed to do. In physical therapy, we talk a lot about proximal stability and distal mobility. And what that means is like proximal meaning center of body, so like spine, everything from like cutting the shoulders off, the hips off, that middle trunk portion of us creates stability so that we could have distal mobility. I always think of like when you go to the car wash and you've got that balloon that blows up and then the arms start to swing. The arms don't swing unless the middle is stable. So that's what our bodies need to do. And we think about that rower who is having difficulty at the catch. So using that distal mobility is becoming difficult. That's why we're kind of thinking about what is the proximal or center of the body doing that's not allowing for that distal mobility. So the required motions for rowing and some of the master's considerations I like to think about. Mobility is key. We need mobility throughout our whole body, not only just for the rowing stroke, but just for the rowing activity. Remember, we've got to carry boats, we've got to bend down, we've got to get in and out of the boat without having to roll in and out of the boat. And some things I like to think about, especially for masters, when we think about like the hip and knee. If we're starting to lose hip or knee flexion, that's a sign of something that's going on, and that you might need to speak to, if you have medical staff with your team, you may want to speak to them about that. If knee flexion, so closing that knee, bringing the shin to the thigh bone, if that's uncomfortable, or if bringing the knee to the chest and bending the hip is uncomfortable, there's something going on. That's not a normal progression with age. Some things that do progress with age and we lose range of motion is ankle range of motion. I like to talk about ankle range of motion because normal range for the ankle is 0 to 20 degrees for the toe up position. I'm talking about like dorsiflexion, so toes up. You only need about 20 degrees to walk efficiently, but in rowing, our foot stretchers are set at 37 to 40 degrees. So there's a flexibility component that we need to be aware of. So as we get older, we lose a little bit of ankle dorsiflexion. We can lose shoulder flexion and shoulder abduction. Shoulder flexion becomes important because we want to be able to push the boats overhead. Hip extension, not as important to rowing, but of course, if you're walking with a boat overhead and you don't have a lot of hip extension, it's going to make it very, very difficult not to put that pressure into your low back as you're walking, because you're keeping your feet not underneath you, but more in front of you. And those changes in ankle and hip range can affect your compression at the catch. They can affect your body position, the ability to carry the boat. And they say a lot of times tightness is a defense for weakness. Our bodies tend to tighten down when our body knows that if you get into that position, you don't have enough strength to manage that position. So a lot of times when someone says, oh, my hip flexor is tight on the right side, it always is, I think to myself, is it tight? Or is it defending you from getting into a position or doing something that would then result in injury? Our bodies are very, very smart and adapt quite easily to the conditions that we put it under. Also, there's postural changes. We always know that people, gravity gets the best of all of us, so the head comes forward, the shoulders come down, we get that rounded back position. We lose thoracic extension. So our thoracic spine is kind of like from shoulders to like mid back down, and that spine can start to curve forward. It loses extension, which is shoulders back, which is actually the position that we need to be in while we're rowing. So if we don't have that range of motion, that can become an issue. The other thing is apical breathing. We tend to breathe a lot with our upper chest and not really work that expansion through the diaphragm, and that can become an issue as far as feeling out of breath, difficulty with managing your breath while you're rowing. Has a lot to do with the tightness and the overuse of neck muscles for breathing. So we're just going to take a little bit of look here at like kinematic tools. I like to think of there's a bunch of different things we can do without getting too fancy, and using a tape measure and knowing your actual stroke length. So going back into the finish, you sit all the way at the finish, measure the handle and draw maybe a line on the floor where the center of the handle is at your finish position. Come all the way up to the catch, measure that and draw the line on the floor. Measure that out in centimeters, and then you can use one of your fitness apps, whether it be the C2 Logbook or Row Hero or another app that gives you stroke length, and you can use that number and then know if you're over compressing. Another great way to use a tape measure is heel cup to seat in your erg versus your boat. So say you own your own single, you want to work towards having better compression. You can measure that heel cup, so the bottom of where your heel would be up to the top of the seat, get that measurement, match that measurement with what you're doing on your erg at home so that you're working towards the flexibility that you need. Also, you can measure your lib length. It can be very informative. I do a lot of measurements with my clients in gym, and what's shown to me at this point is that the short femur has the advantage. The person who has a shorter femur just compresses and gets into a tighter position at the catch. And so knowing kind of like your anthropometrics, how your measurements of your body affect like your body position can be really informative. There's video. So this is a video of on form. And this video has the dots is for the joint positions, and that can be very informative. OnForm is an app that you can get. And using video, you can do sequencing, you can do slow motion, you can then be able to kind of delineate out what are you doing. Another thing is using still photos. Using Angles and app is an app that you can show what your position is. You can measure out different areas and figure out, am I getting too much layback? Am I getting too much compression? Am I over compressing? All right, so we're gonna go right into talking about some of the parameters to assess when we're talking kinematics. So the finished position, and I'm gonna just let this video run over here if I can get it to link up for us. So this is the OnForm video. It'll start up in a little bit. So finished position, we wanna think about the legs being straight and the knees being in a soft extended position. We want to think about either 0 to 10 degrees of knee kind of like extension that we have. That plantar flexion is usually a range of motion that people don't have trouble with that toe down position. You want to think about your layback being in that 20 to 25 degree range. When you're in the layback position, your obliques, your abdominals, and your spinal extensors are all just kind of a little bit turned on. If I have someone who's getting too much layback, a lot of times what I have them do is go into a lot of layback, have them sit up nice and tall, and then I have them lay back to the point where where they don't feel like they have to turn on their abdominal muscles, but they feel supported. And that's usually about that 25 degrees of layback. Remember, for our sweep rowers, you know that outside hand brushes the trunk, the forearm is going to be parallel to the water or to the ground, and the wrist is in neutral. For our sculling friends, the thumbs are coming into that low rib. Something I like to talk about as far as my sculling people would be neck rotation. You want to make sure that you're thinking about doing a little bit of range of motion and working on that rotation off the water. If you're only using it while you're rowing, you're not going to be having those improvements that you'd like to see in your ability when you get to the finish to be able to rotate and look over your shoulder. Something I talk to people about also is gaze stabilization. And if you want more information on gaze stabilization, please shoot me an email, rowingonthesquare@gmail.com. There's a couple different reflexes that we have. We have a vestibular ocular reflex, which is what keeps our eyes stable as our head moves and keeps us looking at one particular object. There's also ocular tracking. So that's your eyeballs staying inside your head and moving with your head as you move your head. So that's really important for our sculling friends, because that is the motion that we are using. As we rotate our head, we're keeping those eyes stable and we're looking behind ourselves. So training those outside of the boat is really, really a helpful thing to be doing. And then we talked about stroke length on the erg, being able to measure that out. So as we move on in the stroke, we're talking about body prep. So arms are straight and we want to establish the power position. And what I talk about as far as the start power position is that trunk being over, being pivoted over on that hip, and us being about 25 to 30 degrees off of perpendicular, rotated forward. So as I get this video going here, we can stop it in that position. If I can get it to hold for us here. Sometimes it wants to cooperate. So that body prep, that body over position, I like to talk about the fact that is pelvis on hip. A lot of times people in mobility and in feeling, it's really easy to do hip on pelvis movement. So that's like bringing your knee to your chest. Like I feel like that's a really easy pattern for people to understand. But in rowing, we have to go pelvis on hip. And that's that hinge motion. And I've been finding in clinic that it's really helpful to get on hands and knees and practice pelvis on hip without low back motion. A lot of people combined their pelvic, like their pelvic hinge with some type of low back motion, and that it can be, if you can manage it, if you're strong enough to have all that low back motion in combination with pelvic motion, more power to you. But most people, when they get a lot of pelvic and low back going on at the same time, it's a recipe for having some type of discomfort as you put pressure on, as you increase the rate, as you increase the volume on the erg, especially as you're training for ergatas. Yes, we want to make sure that that low back is staying neutral, and that the pelvis on hip motion is just pelvis on hip, nothing else moving. So the compression effect from body prep and not being in the correct position, the more body angle you have, the less compressed you'll be at the catch. And what happens is the shoulder, if the shoulder comes further down and the body's coming ahead of this hip dot, what ends up happening is the hip dot moves back. So the more that this area, kind of that shoulder area comes down, that shoulder dot comes down, the more the hip dot comes back, and you're actually making your compression less. So a little bit of less body angle, you can actually compress yourself more because the motion comes from the hip and the knee and the ankle. So it actually lets you get into a tighter position. So if you're having trouble with compression, you want to work on your compression, try a little bit of less body angle as you come into the catch. Once you're in that body angle position, I always talk about like letting the legs move to meet the chest. Like the movement should be done. Like as soon as you're pivoting over with that body prep, the rest of the movement is coming from those legs. For the drive kinematics, we're talking about straight arms. We talk about shoulders low, shoulder blades not excessively protracted. And I'm sorry, I couldn't think of a better verbiage for it, but the protraction of the shoulder blades is that they're coming out towards the outside of the trunk, not close to the spine, but then kind of rolling out. You want a little bit of protraction of the shoulder as you're coming up and in that catch position, but you don't want it to be excessive. Remember, the shoulder blade, the top of the shoulder blade is actually the socket part of our shoulders. So if we take that socket and we keep moving it out, it puts that shoulder in a weak position, unable to stabilize as you go through the drive. When you're driving, you want that neutral spine. Low back is straight-ish. I know there's going to be a little bit of a flexion component there. Too much flexion or a breakdown. Some people have like a breakdown where they get into the catch position and like their mid-back moves during the drive. That's something that is a sign of instability. You want to make sure that you're being as stable as possible. Other things that I've noticed a lot with rowers is a little bit of neck extension, a little bit of head up at the catch. You want to keep that chin down. Neck movement is associated with changes in muscle tone. So our overall tone is what keeps us sitting upright in a chair, not melting into a pile of bones and muscle. And head movement changes muscle tone. So you want to keep that head in a neutral position throughout the stroke so that you're not modulating your muscle tone throughout your body, which means spinal muscle changes. It could interfere with your sequencing. Just basics as far as catch position, the shins are vertical, slight heel rise. Again, when you're taking those stroke length measurements, that's where you're going to take your measurement when you get up to the catch handle center and measure to the ground. So as we're drive sequencing, we want to make sure that the trunk is stable as the drive initiates. And then at that transition point, and let me see if I can get my video going here for you guys and see if we can kind of talk about this. Now, when I'm talking about this 90 degrees over, oh, I caught it at just the right spot. There we go. So the handle is over the foot plate and the knee is showing this 90 degrees here. That's when the heels should be coming flat. So you have a little bit of heel rise that happens when you're at the drive. That heel rise should be gone by this point. So that means that the heel is now flat on the foot plate and you're providing that force fully through the foot, fully through the stretcher. No changes in spine position. So the spine should still be where it was when you were up at the catch. You're staying in that prower position. People who have a little bit of early open, what they're doing is they've gone out of the power position, they're getting in the power position, and then they're driving. So because there's really a position that you feel you're strongest in, and you can really push through the legs. And in this last comment, it's just that the legs are near straight, the trunk is vertical, and the shoulders when the arms begin to pull. And we'll kind of look at that as that last little piece there through that drive there. Muscle sequencing, I like to talk about this just from like a physical therapy standpoint. This information is from Klezhnev from the Biomechanics of Rowing, and I really loved his explanation for this, that simultaneous leg and trunk activation is actually counterproductive because of the way that our bodies are set up. So our quads are anteriorly pulling on our pelvis. They're on the ASIS, so the front of our pelvis. They are connected to that, so there's this anterior pull. And the quads want to extend the knee. The hamstrings and the glute want to extend the trunk and extend and open the hip. So we want to activate those quads. And in this picture, you see how there's that little bit of heel rise. The moment between the heel rise and then the initiation of the foot onto the foot plate, that's quad. So you really want to think about keeping your glutes relaxed, and you want to think about straightening your knee for that first little bit as you get the knees down. As the knees come down, you can have that hamstring and glute add in, because now you're going to ask for the trunk to open and for the hip to open. But if you're activating everything all at once, you're going to get this push and pull, which will then kind of go to that low spine. So we want to make sure that we're thinking as we're sequencing our drive, we're thinking about that knee straightening happening first. So just some master's consideration, and we're talking about, you have to change the feel in order to change any of these biomechanics. And there's some limitations based on health. Like some people are very flexible, so sometimes they can end up with too much body angle. We have someone who their feeling on the recovery is that the catch feels like a sloping down and a rising up. If you're having that feeling where you slope down and up, that means that potentially your body angle is developing over your recovery rather than getting into your hinge and holding that hinge and moving up to the catch. And when you develop your body angle over the recovery, the hands tend to drop and you tend to get into a low power position. So your body comes forward. That, when we talked about the shoulder dot and the hip dot is down. Now we have to move the hip dot back up so that, or not the hip dot, but the shoulder dot back up so that you can drive efficiently. Remember, the drive is more of a deadlift than a squat. And if you come into the catch and you bring the shoulders down too far, you're not going to be able to push and be in that power position. If you have too little body angle, again, that talks about the feeling like a squat versus a deadlift. And you're more likely to be kind of upper body dominant and more pulling on the drive rather than being able to push on the foot plate. For poor flexibility, of course, mobility work is key. For someone who's getting too much body angle, it's actually sequencing work and body awareness, proprioception, understanding where your body is in space as you work through your drive. Your consequences of poor ankle flexibility: increased heel rise at the catch. You can either have under compression, where the knees kind of where the heel stays flat and the knee never gets to perpendicular, the shin never gets perpendicular, or you have over compression where the heels rise up too much because you can't manage keeping the heel down and kind of close to the foot plate at that catch position, and the knee goes past perpendicular. This is a really great test. This is my son, some pictures of my son doing the squat to step stool test, and I'm going to turn off the volume on there, and we'll get these going. So what he's doing is he's just squatting down to a step stool, and this is just a great test for if you're a master's coach or if you just really want to take a look at how you manage your body weight. I would suggest, if you've never done this before, start with a chair. With a chair that's usually 18 inches from the floor to the seat. Squat down to the chair, arms straight out in front of you. Don't use any help unless you need it, and stand up. If you can do that, continue to move down to lower and lower surfaces. A step stool is about the distance that you would need to squat to get into the catch position. So it's about that 18 centimeters from the ground, and it can be very informative. You know, you can take a look at how your hips are moving, how your knees are moving. If you take a look at my son here as he goes down, you can see how he's shifting his body over, he's leaning to the left, the knees are collapsing. And this side picture here, you can see how he lacks the ankle range of motion, so he has to tip his up onto the toes in order to get his body down that low. And this can be really informative, and it can be a great tool that you can use as a coach to track progress too. If you're doing mobility work as a master's, or you're doing it as with your master's team, you could videotape everyone, and then 3 months later, after you've been doing mobility work and different work on your catch position, revisit this and take a look at what those results are. So we're going to move from kinematics and we're going to move into kinetics. We're going to talk about force curves, and the example here is I have the Row Hero app on the picture here, and we'll get more into it in the later slides. So the force curve is a really great teaching tool. It's really accessible to everyone. For myself, I use it with my athletes. I send them home to take a look at it and to then reinforce what we're talking about in practice as far as how we're managing our force. Is that force curve nice and full? It acts as that rower's fingerprint, and what we're trying to do is to put more force underneath it. We're trying to push that force curve out. Just a quick review. Here's some information from Klezhnev, and there's some different the Peter Clevor graphs here. To read these graphs, the black line is like the total. So I'm looking at the graphs, the 4 graphs on the right hand side. That's the total force that this type of sequencing creates, and then each, like the green line is the legs, the blue's the trunk, and the arms, and it's showing the contribution to all those different to the different styles of rowing. And we're really looking for a sequential drive, which is that bottom right picture, because that's going to create that drive that has a longer sustainable force, and we want to try to keep our force as close to that peak as long as possible, because that's what's going to translate into the boat moving quickly. As we look at force curves, I just like to do a quick little explanation. This is also a graph from Klezhnev's Biomechanics of Rowing. I love this graph because it kind of informs us, like, what does a graph look like in the boat, which would be using like the Empower oar locks, which are an option for getting force measurements through your oar locks. The Peach system, which is more of like a more advanced team type of system for getting foot pressure and oar lock pressure and handle force and all those different values. But for us, we have access to the C2 curve, or a Row Perfect curve, or a BioRower curve, and just some differences to keep in mind. So the erg will favor more upper body strength because the handle force is greater. So you want to make sure that you're just aware of that you can kind of muscle it out a bit on the erg, whereas on the water, the stronger legs, which we all know is just more efficient for moving the boat. So those stronger, faster legs have the advantage there. We all think about the ergs don't float, but they don't lie either. So it's that kind of, it's a balance of information. The force curve shape in the boat is a little bit wider, a little bit stouter or stockier, and then it tends to be taller and slimmer from our machines. And the peak force is earlier in the boat versus your machine force, and it's just the setup's a little bit different. When we're then talking about, should I be using a dynamic erg or should I use a stationary erg? Well, they both have different uses. So your dynamic erg is going to help to teach you to catch through the force, through the foot stretcher, like the water would, like a water force. It helps with synchronization. The con on the dynamic erg is that if you're working in sequence, when you have a lot of people working together, you just need to make sure that their technique is that they're not pushing the foot plate away from each other, because if you're the last person on 4 ergs that are connected together, you could potentially push the foot plate away from the other athletes. And if you're not aware that you're doing that and you don't know what that feeling is and the other athletes aren't telling you, you could be ingraining a muscle patterning system that you don't want. On stationary ergs, it's great feedback for physiology. I do all my physiological work on a stationary erg. It's great for basics of body sequencing, posture, and forces. But the con is if you spend too much time on that stationary erg, because it does favor the arms, you can develop a little bit of early open trunk, slow leg drive, depending on how you're managing your drag factors, and you could be encouraging a soft catch with like a little bit of a late peak force. If you are interested in doing more with force curves, I'd highly encourage you to download the Hero app. It's free for just one person to use at a time. So you can get this information, just kind of play around with it. And I wanted to go through all the different parts of the force curve. The total, like this purple arrow, I'm gonna go kind of out of order here. This purple arrow is talking about like 0 being like the beginning of the drive, and then this 100% being the end at the finish. So this is a picture of the full drive. So this yellow arrow that we see at the start of the curve, that's telling us, what's the initiation of the leg look like, or the beginning of the stroke look like. Your red arrow up here is talking about trunk initiation and how is that happening. And then you have this blue up here, which is your peak force. And then we have the green arrow, which is telling us about like our smoothness. Our orange arrow also talking about our smoothness. Row Hero has, if you're going at a 9.7 or greater, that's considered a smooth stroke. A smooth stroke is a stroke that stays on the predicted line, which is this dotted orange line. And just in general, we want to think about the force curve as being a representation of the first third of it being the representation of the legs, the middle third being the representation of what's happening with the trunk, and the last third being what happens as a representation of the finish. Here I have a couple comparisons here. I'll scoot through these pretty quick because I want to give a little bit of time to answer some questions. The most efficient curve would be a rectangle. That would be awesome. Like if we could instantly put the power on and get to 100% of peak power, hold it there, and then just drop it off at the finish. That would be ideal. However, the general goal is to stay above 70% of the peak force as long as possible, and that just indicates that you're using the large muscle groups efficiently. This middle graph here is an athlete who opens early with her shoulders. You can see the disconnect in that early drive. She was continuing to add body angle as she went into the catch, had to rise out of that over compressed position into a power position. By the time she got into the power position, it was mid drive. So that's why you're seeing that peak force there, because that's where she finally is in a position where she can actually apply force through the plate. Upon testing this particular person, she showed scapular stabilizer weakness, she had core weakness, she had poor hinge control, very strong legs, but just not a core that can manage it. And you can see this in her graph. The graph on the right is an athlete who showed some initial hand lift. And so if you're getting this little blip, this is the far right graph. If you're getting a little blip in your graphs, potentially it's movement of the handle. So you're moving the handle up and down instead of drawing it straight through, and that's the indication that the graphs will give you. And her peak force in this particular graph sharply declines after the transition from the legs and the trunk. So she is not stabilizing and holding that peak force for a long time. She's not staying above 70% for a long period of time. Here we have an athlete who's completing, I believe he's at a 30 for this, and this is watching some force curves in real time. When you're taking measurements like this, try to do some at race pace, time to do some at steady state. You can also use this to be like a test of your drag factor. If you're having trouble and you're feeling like your graphs are really ragged and very bumpy and off of where they should be, try modulating or changing your drag factor. Give yourself less drag. See if that can let you evenly distribute your force as you drive back. On average, we say for masters, we say keep the drag factor somewhere around 100, but I've lowered it down to as low as 80 for some people to really get them to, at power, to have that smoothness, it takes the extra muddiness off of the drive, and that could help with evening out your graphs. You can notice some variation in his curve here. There's a little bit of a chain bounce. If you take a look at his shoulders, watch the fold, the seam on the shirt. He has a little bit of extra protraction at the shoulder, which is destabilizing that front end ever so slightly. Otherwise, it's getting some really good full grafts here. He's getting, he's pushing that graft out. He's managing that chain bounce in order to try to keep the force production moving. I love the force curves because it's a visual feedback. It's instant visual feedback. What did I do on this stroke versus what did I do on this stroke? Am I maintaining my body angle and really driving with the legs and then opening up the trunk? So you can videotape yourself and then have the force curves running so you can watch and see how you're managing your forces. Making time for biomechanics, building the bricks of your wall. Pick an assessment tool that works for you. Maybe Row Hero is perfect for you. Maybe the C2 logbook and keeping track of some of the different ideas and variables that you can track in there is good for you. Be systematic. Do pre and post testing. I like to use like an ABBA type of testing. So say you're managing or you're looking at drag factor. Set the drag factor to 80, and then the next piece, next 250 piece you're gonna do, meter piece you're gonna do 2 pieces with a 90 drag factor, and then you're gonna take it back to 80, and then compare all of those readouts and see, how did my stroke length change based on my drag factor? What did my force curves look like in this piece versus that piece? Taking notes and developing a pattern and a process will really be helpful to work through all that different information. Block out time to do some video analysis, and if you're a coach and sharing data with other athletes, as a lot of masters teams, maybe a volunteer will do video 1 week, and using that video to take some moments to analyze what are people doing at the finish, what are they doing at the catch. You can always refer out. Please reach out and contact me. I work with a lot of teams on developing mobility programs, whether it be mobility, testing and assessment of masters rowers, getting an idea of which master needs a little bit more help than another, to be able to achieve those positions. We talked a lot about mobility and during this presentation, and without the proper mobility, it's really going to be hard to follow that cue from the coach to sit up tall at the catch if you just don't have the thoracic range, or you don't have the shoulder range to do so, or you have scapular weakness. Those are things that you just can't fix out on the water. You have to kind of take a look at them outside of that. Thank you for attending my presentation. I really appreciate you guys taking a moment to listen to what I've had to say about biomechanics. I love biomechanics. I love rowing. Feel free to reach out to me. I will email you right back. And my email is rowingonthesquare@gmail.com. I'm at Rowing on the Square on any social media, so Facebook and Instagram. Check out my YouTube. I have over 500 videos of exercises that are delineated by body type. So if you're looking for an exercise for your back, or if you're looking for an exercise for your knee, they're all separated out. Presentations and things are listed on there, and then you can check out my website too. Thank you.
Adrien, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. We have a couple chats or a couple questions already, and I think a couple more are coming in.
Okay.
But to start off, can you give an example of how to improve pelvis on hip?
Okay, so what I mean by pelvis on hip would be working on hinge work. So I find in gym, I get people on their hands and knees, and I have them do kind of like yoga, is it cat and cow? So I have them go into those positions where you really hyperextend that low back and then hyperflex the low back. And then I have the person get in neutral. I hold that neutral position, and I have them move their butt towards their heels. So kind of rock back almost into like a child's pose position. And while you're doing that, I have people think about how that hip and pelvis are associated with each other, so that pelvis is moving on the hip joint. And the other way you can do it is with standing with a dowel. So a dowel behind your back, and then you hinge, and you're looking for just the movement through the hip and the pelvis, no low back connection there.
Great, thank you. Another question in here, Row Hero versus C2 force curves.
I like the Row Hero one because it's just a little bit more robust. The thing is that the C2 curve, because it's kind of pixelated, sometimes you'll lose like just those little blippets that are happening on the front end or in the middle of the curve. So the disadvantage for Row Hero on the free version, you can't get like a cumulative picture of your force curves. However, I've kind of routed around that, and what I do is I videotape my screen. So I use a camera, like my phone camera, to videotape the actual rowing. Then I use a tablet, which is connected to the C2. This is very complicated, sorry you guys. But I use a tablet that I connect to the C2. I then screen record on the tablet, and then I match them up later in iMovie so that I can see both at the same time. And that's just the way that I've kind of tinkered with it to be able to get all that information at once. But a lot of my clients like to just do the video and then have the force curve live as they're doing their pieces, and that's really helpful.
Awesome. We have a lot of questions rolling in now.
Okay.
Next one from Tom. Can you suggest ideas for changing the foot plate angles in boats that they are a fixed angle?
Changing the angle, you could use like wedges, heel wedges in the actual shoes. You could wedge the shoes rather than, because if the foot plate is stationary and there's nothing you can do with the actual foot plate, you could wedge underneath it. Like you could use foam, you could use, if you go to like Home Depot, they make those like little thin wedges. You could wedge them underneath the shoes and get more, like raise the heel up. If you're trying to get more like toe up, more dorsiflexion, so you have someone who's really flexible and you want to give them more angle to work with, that's a little bit trickier. You'd have to build up the toe part of the shoe. So that there's more, so that you can have it be a steeper angle. But if you're looking for less angle, which a lot of times is what, as masters, because people don't have as much ankle range of motion as what you're looking for, I'd suggest wedging the actual shoe. And you could do a shoe insert too. That would work also.
Great. As a coach, when a rower complains of elbow pain following rowing, what parts of mechanics would I evaluate before referring to PT?
I take a look at what they're doing with their wrists. People do funky stuff with their wrists. Whether they lack mobility in their wrist, because the wrist is, one of our mobile joints. So if there's a lack in that mobility, a tightness, I would have them, do wrist flexion extension. See if they can see what it looks like on both sides. Are they looking the same when they raise their wrist up on one side versus the other? That's one way that I kind of do like a quick screen. The other thing is check shoulder. I always check above and below because elbow is a stability joint. So it's got to be either coming from the wrist or from the shoulder. And then the elbow then will start to talk about some type of aggravation. The other thing is if they're over gripping too. A lot of times because the finger flexors are attached at the elbow. So like, I don't know if you can, as I tighten there, you can see that the finger flexors, they attach all the way up here, so you could be getting some type of overuse from the excessive like gripping on the handle. But I would take a look at wrist, hand, maybe take a look at shoulder and see, are they even when they bring their shoulders up and over, and if you can't figure it out from there, it would be good to pull somebody in to kind of take a look at it.
Great. A question from George here. Are there any special exercises considerations you can suggest for an active master sculler, me, with degenerative disc disease in the lumbar vertebrae?
I would work a lot on stability, and I would really be particular about your core work. Because with the degeneration of the spine, you want to just make sure that your muscles are doing the work for you. So we think about the structural part of our bodies, the structures, the ligaments, the tendons. Those are set up to create some stability, but it's really our muscles, our girdle that really controls that. And you want to be focusing on like your hip hinge, making sure that you're not getting excessive motion through the spine that's going to aggravate your low back. With the degeneration, the decreased stability, that excessive motion could potentially be an area that you'd want to keep track of. You may want to you could check in with me, or you could check in with another physical therapist that's close to you to kind of just take a look at your mechanics and make sure that you're protecting your spine as much as possible. But core work would be where I'd start.
From Lisa here, do you have a dry land exercise recommendation to squeeze glutes at proper timing for rowing strokes?
I think getting on the erg and really being purposeful with your movement on the erg. If you go to my YouTube channel, there's like a banded erg, elevated erg. Like I elevate the back of the erg, I put a band around like my low hips, and on that particular activity, I'm working on like straightening the legs and then activating the glutes and like it just kind of like it's like a leg straighten with a glute activation, and it's on the erg, so it has the same type of slide feel to it. And I think that that's a really great way to kind of mimic the sequencing that you really want to see or feel when you're on the when you're on the water, when you're going through your rowing stroke. But it would be key to take the time to break the movement down and just go really slow. I know we hate going slow, it's awful, but but taking like 5 or a couple minutes a day, 5 minutes, where you're really thinking about, am I straightening my knees? Am I activating my quads? And then kind of squeezing my glutes to open my trunk. And then just kind of like think it out, feel it out. What does that feel like? And then take some regular strokes and then slow it down again. I'm straightening my knee, I'm squeezing my glutes, I'm opening my trunk. Like taking that time to kind of compare the feeling. And once always feel like when you can put your finger on the feeling, it makes it that much easier to add it to your rowing.
Great, thank you. A question from Gavin. What are your thoughts about the NK Empower and using power data to train on the water?
I think if you have time for it, it can be a really, really great and fun way to kind of to take your rowing to that next level. I personally haven't worked with the NK or locks. I have had some people send me some information on it, and just really being thoughtful for how you're going to use it. So the one person who sent me some information took some initial measurements doing their regular rowing. Then what they did was they then completed some drills. They noticed that they had a lot of catch slip. So catch slip is like the amount of time that it takes from when you get to the catch to the blade entering the water and being fully submerged. And that number, if you can decrease it, means that you're getting your blade in the water earlier, which means you can then drive faster, or drive more efficiently. So he wanted to improve this. So he did his regular rowing, took the data. He did some drills. He just did some rowing on the square and just was working on placement, getting the blade in. Then he did a comparison with some data after the drills. And then he started working, once he had that data, he started working with shoe placement. So working on having his shoes being in different spots so that then he could change where he's catching and the angle, like increase the catch angle so he had more time on the front end to have the blade in the water and drive back. So if you're using like an Empower or lock or some type of data-driven item, just make sure that you write out just a little plan. Like how am I going to use this? What's my goal? Figure out what's the goal for it, set that goal, and then use that like ABBA type of testing. Test one condition, test the second condition, test the next condition, look at your information.
So a general question here. I recently have pain behind my knee. Any thoughts on what this could be caused from?
Again, and when I think pain behind the knees, I think either it's above or below, or we are kind of in that transition point. Like, so if you transitioned from stationary erg to, especially stationary erg to dynamic erg, because I know a lot of people were doing like training for ergatas, and then at least around here we're done with ergatas. Now we're starting to think about the water, but it snowed today, so we're not rowing. So so that transition from one type of rowing to another can always kind of creep up, and especially the transition from stationary to dynamic, because there's a change in like the hamstring activation. So your hamstrings are located behind the knee. They attach behind the knee. They go up to your to your sit bone. So sit bone to knee is where they attach, and that extra kind of pull on the recovery from the dynamic where you're then not pulling your body up to the catch, but you're pulling the machine to you, can result in a little bit of fatigue into the hamstring and a little bit of hamstring pain. I would look at hip strength potentially if we're talking behind the knee pain, and then take a look at ankle range of motion, and then heel raise strength. Heel raise is a real easy test to take. Like, stand on one foot. If you're good on balance, stand on one foot. See how many heel raises you can do on one side versus the other. You may be able to do less on the side that's a little bit painful than the one that's not. So you might need to start working on a little bit of ankle strength too, and that will help with, because the gastrocs are Achilles area calf muscles. Those attach behind the knee too. So I think either hamstring, or I think Achilles, or I think ankle range or hip extension. But you might need to see a PT if it's starting to kind of accumulate and you can't figure out why. But if you have had a recent transition from stationary to dynamic, whether it's stationary erg to water or stationary erg to dynamic erg, that could be explaining that too.
Mm-hmm. Great. Talking about ergs, we're now going to throw in erg sliders into this question.
Oh, I love slides.
Okay, well, hey, you just answered half of it. What are your thoughts on using erg sliders as part of the learning or rehab process for low back pain?
Oh, I love slides. Like I said, I love slides. I think that it does decrease the forces in comparison to the stationary erg. So the stationary erg, as you come up to that foot plate, there's like a dynamic of like rebound. There's the weight of your body plus the acceleration that you're generating up to the catch. So you're managing all of that pressure. Whereas when you're on the sliders, you're pulling the machine to you, so it feels more like the water, and the dynamic foot plate force is less. So if you're someone who's having trouble with low back pain from being on the erg, and when you drive, I instantly go to sliders for that person, or some other type of dynamic erg. That will decrease the forces. Something you should probably do if you've got low back pain, you need to videotape yourself, and make sure you're not sharing on Google Photos with everybody. But I would strip down, like if you can get into like a pair of tight spandex shorts and like a sports bra if you're a lady, no top if you're a guy, because you can see if you're just moving something on that initial drive, the initial initiation of the drive. A lot of times people with back pain, there's some type of destabilization right as they initiate that drive, and you can see it. It's almost like a click change. The back does something. You might have a little bit of destabilization going on there, or just weakness in the whole system that's not managing the amount of increased force we love to put through our feet, and then we expect the rest of our body just to eat it up, and sometimes the low back says, no, I'm not. So it starts to hurt.
We're going to stay on erg still. There's a couple coming in about that.
Okay.
Second question to erg, do you have a drag number you typically recommend for masters rowers?
I usually start at 100, and then from there I look at what's kind of going on. So like, it depends on the person's goal. So say someone wants to compete in an ergata, they're going to be doing 1,000 meters. From there, I would then start testing. Okay, I'm going to take a look at you at 18. I'll take a look at you at 24. I'll take a look at you at 30 or 28, whatever your most comfortable areas are. And I'm going to compare all that data. I would use Row Hero, and then I would take a look at your drive time. So drive time and drag factor, I always like to think of them as friends, because if your drag factor is too high for what you're trying to do, your drive time is going to increase. So on average, like Olympians drive time, they got like 0.8 seconds, like not 0.9 seconds. It's like their drives are extremely long. Whereas like our average person is going to be somewhere between 0.6 and 0.7 seconds. Anything higher than 0.7 seconds is too muddy. Like, you've got too much drag on that machine. You need to take that down. And by taking the drag down, sometimes then that helps with pacing. So that allows you to get that pace that you need to get. And once I get people getting the pace that they that's comfortable and that they can produce over and over again, then we can start working on splits. Then we can start talking about adding more power. But I always feel like I start at that 100 mark. I take a look at drive times at those different stroke rates. Are we staying somewhere comfortably between 0.6 and 0.7 seconds? If we're still not able to, if we're falling outside of that, whether it's you need more drag because your drive time is 0.5, you're just driving too fast. Like I need to give you a little bit more resistance, so then you can then use that extra resistance to produce a little bit more power. So it's a playing game that I do. C2 will give you the drive times, the C2 logbook if you export to Excel, and also Row Hero. If you export to Excel, you'll get the per stroke, every single stroke. You'll get to see what your drive time is. So I just do a piece where I kind of modulate the stroke rate, and then I take a look at it on the back end.
Great, thank you. Just a heads up, we are coming close on time, so I know there's still some questions in here, but I think we can get through a couple more.
Okay.
There's a question here about slide 17. I don't know if you want me to go back to that one.
All right, let me see if I can. Let me escape. It might be easier for me to do it this way.
Oh, perfect.
So I can see which slide we're talking about. Slide 17. Okay. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So Rosenberg style has greater power in total. How do these manifest out on the water? How on the body for masters?
So the Rosenberg has more, like a higher peak power, but the power underneath the curve in total is less. Because the peak, they go up to really high and then they come back down. And on the water, what translates is more time at 70% of your peak makes the boat go faster, if that makes sense. So the boat doesn't respond to like really, really high peak power. The boat responds to higher than average overall power. Does that make sense?
Super helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. We have a question here. Does turning while sculling worsen cervical stenosis?
Well, it would close the cervical stenosis is the narrowing of the foramen where the holes where your nerves come out from your spine. So the stenosing is like the closing of that and like the narrowing of it. And as rotation tends to close that. So if someone has stenosis, I would recommend them getting a mirror. However, I just don't want people to use the mirror and like not necessarily just continue to work on your mobility. I think mobility is always, whether you have arthritis, whether you have some type of degeneration, I think mobility is always key. Mobility is always king, and our joints are made to move, and the motion's the lotion. So I always, even if you're having a little bit of stenosis, I would say continue to do your range within comfort and keep the range that you have. If you're turning your head and you're getting your symptoms down your arm or you're getting pain in the neck, well then yes, I would get a mirror instead of continually looking hundreds of times over your shoulder at a practice. But in general, just to keep the range that you have moving well, I would continue to do your neck range of motion. I would do your flexions, your extensions, your lateral glides, your to shoulders. I would still work on your neck mobility even with the stenosis, but just within comfort and when it doesn't create your symptoms.
Great. And last question here from Patricia. Do you recommend rowers using non-steroidal pain medication prior to practice to avoid pain? I often feel knowing the pain helps to avoid further injury.
It depends. It's a person-to-person type of thing, and definitely talk to your primary care physician and make sure that regular use is something that your system can handle. For some people who are taking other medications, taking medication like that regularly over time is not something that your physician would want you to do. But if your physician feels that it's comfortable for your system, it's not going to interfere with something else. If taking that medication helps you get through your practice, that's helpful. But the other thing to think about is if it's a musculoskeletal pain, then potentially if you did pursue some physical therapy, or you can see physical therapist, chiropractor, a strength and conditioning coach. If you did kind of add something like that to your routine, there's the potential that you wouldn't have the pain. So I'm not saying no, I'm not saying yes, I'm saying it depends on for each person, but if it's a musculoskeletal issue, it's something that maybe could be worked on. And if you're interested in taking that next step, that would be something that you'll want to consider.
Adrien, that was absolutely fantastic. You packed so much information into an hour. And thank you for answering all of those questions.
Sure.
Before I close out and just do some housekeeping items, is there anything that you want to leave the group with today?
I've already said it once, but the motion's the lotion. Keep moving, keep mobilizing, keep using your body in a healthy way. Keep rowing. And if you have any questions or want to reach out to me, the email goes directly to me. It's a one-woman show, so there's no assistant or anything. So if you reached out to me and you gave me your phone number, we could get on the phone and we can just chat rowing. I love doing things like that. So I'm here to help people. I really enjoy being able to use my physical therapy skills with rowing. So if I can help somebody feel a little bit better and get out there and row and be a little bit more competitive, that's what I'm here for.
That's amazing. Well, thank you. Thank you for this presentation. Thank you for everything that you're doing for the sport. Thanks to all attendees for joining today. This is being recorded, so it will be posted onto Sketch after the presentation in about a day or so. But before I close out, a big thank you to our conference sponsor, Coffee Corporation, and big thank you to our additional sponsors, Filippi and Crew Lab. We hope to see you guys in one of the next sessions, but thanks so much for your time. And Adrien, there's big kudos in the chats coming in. So.
All right, thank you everybody for attending. Appreciate it.
Have a good day, everyone.
Take care.
Recording stopped.
So that was pretty amazing. I got to present for the Masters Conference for US Rowing. I'm going to post this on my website too, so this might be where you're watching it. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a really great day. Like I said earlier, if you have any questions, if you need to work with a physical therapist, I do virtual work, so if you want to work with me virtually and improve your rowing, feel free to reach out at any point. Take care. Bye, everyone.